Greetings, Score users. Welcome to the sixth and final labels demo. In this demo, I'm going to discuss the help menu to the program and the various help screens and some of the switches that are available, because I'm sure you are now aware that there is quite an array of things that can be done in the labels control file. Well, there's just as much that can be done from the command line itself. And with all my programs, if you do a / and a question mark, you'll get a help screen. And the first help screen just talks about the general program execution. But then it goes into various topics, label macro creation, and has these switches. And then you see there are more screens, and the screens are going on. And then, oh my goodness, look at this. There are 1,300 lines of text in the help screens, which makes it a little difficult to negotiate. So one thing that you can do is you can use the help menu switch when you execute the program to get a menu screen for the help screens. And the A selection just goes back to the very first one, which isn't really telling you that much. If you go to B, it goes to label macro creation. You may recall the MT switch, which writes the template text file that we saw at the very beginning, which has that kind of glossary to all of the functions that are used by the program. And then there's ways of creating a text file that will contain all of the alias values for the alias statements. There's a mirror switch, which will create a mirror image of, say at some point you need to change an ID value because you've decided to add an instrument. Well, that may seem a little frightening. You think, well, I've created my control file and I have all my IDs hardwired, and now I need to increase them or something. It's not an issue, because you can have the program actually increment values for you, and it will do so with this mirror switch. And you can also test the integrity of the file itself using the mirror switch, using a certain procedure that I can go into later. And that's it for label macro creation. Margin labels creation. There's a default screen here. It explains the default function of labels to create a French score, etc., etc. These help screens are quite wordy, because they function as the manual and reference guide to the program itself. And I make them as wordy as they need to be for me to be able to recall how to do these things. And when you get away from this stuff for a while and you come back to it, it's easy to forget. So I've tried to be very clear, and I've become very loquacious in the process. PSC path is just showing where the PSC files are located. The cap height needs for calculating the height of text, and that can only be gotten from an AFM file. Unfortunately, at my business site, there's a link to the complete AFM files to all the Adobe fonts, where you can find the cap height values for the fonts you're using, font code for the labels that you're creating. P3 and P6 are where you want the text to appear. P6 is the size. You can specify where the margin is using LLM and RLM. C8 P5 is to standardize the text label P6 size to a certain staff size, so that if your staff size is changing from page to page and you want your labels to remain at a fixed absolute size, just specify a default staff size with this switch, and then you'll get that effect. The long switch for long versus short labels, centering things, as you saw in the wooden prints. UE is for this weird UE style labeling that was used in the wooden print score that I showed you. Two obscure switches I won't explain right now. And then there's a gloss on this where it explains how you can get different effects using those two switches. Lots of text to explain all of this. More switches, which I won't go into here. CL, center existing labels and do nothing else. And center rotated, only center the rotated labels, no other functions perform. Auto stack, and this is where you don't have to worry about how the P4 values for the vertical placement of labels that need to be stacked. It can, so long as they're in some sort of consecutive top-down vertical order, it can then figure out what distance it has to be at, so everything clears everything else, and you can actually control the amount of clearance you get and that kind of thing. and that's controlled with this SI value right here. And that's the stacking interval between consecutive, vertical items in a label. Make label version and make rotated label version and register text version. We saw that in one of the demos. More text explains that, and we're finished with that one. Bar line creation. This is the MSBV that we looked at one of the demos. Meet P8. It has to do with the extension of bar lines to the P8 line that's created for use with tiled files that are being printed. More switches I won't go into. And then let's see, template creation. Compute label length stats. Yeah, you want to know how far you need to indent your staves to accommodate the longest label that you have. Well, you can have it just read through your script, your labels control file, and it'll compute what the longest label is, and then you'll know how much you need to indent your staves to accommodate that, so this is very handy. And this is for generating a template and the various values you can put in for P3, P5, P6, and whether or not to override existing files. So if you need to make a whole series of templates to input to, you can use this to automate the creation of all those templates. And here you can state the key signature you need for your templates, so that if you're doing a tonal piece and you need key signatures in all of your staves, well, you tell what key to use, and boom, it'll open in the right key signatures. Or, understanding perfectly well what the transpositions are for the various instruments, because you've specified that in the control file. Then you can compute the combinations of different instruments, because you need to put them in a greatest number to smallest number ordering. And this explains how to get that kind of ordering. All right, so there's that. Now, use file integrity. Oh, I hit miscellaneous. Sorry about that. We'll just go forward with miscellaneous. Add system numbers to the corners of each system, and this is helpful when you are going to be pulling out files with subfile, and you need to see which system is the first system, which system is the second and third, and so on. Other values, other settings I won't go into. All right, I hit M, and I meant to hit F for use file integrity. Yes, so before you make queues, you need to make sure that you have the same number of beats in all the staves. You need to make sure that the files are actually lined up, like as in lineup of the LJ routine. And make sure there are no duplicate IDs among your staves, and that the IDs are in the right order. And labels can test for all of these things. They can perform a beat count test to make sure all the beats are accurate from staff to staff. Not accurate, but the same. The lineup test actually can tell if things are lined up or not, which is pretty cool. It can test for the duplicate IDs, and it can do an ID order test. And then there are switches to skip doing those things, because there's certain procedures that actually perform them before they proceed, and this way you can skip over them, because in certain cases it's handy to be able to do that. And any kind of problematic messages are written to text files that you can then open and examine. So you can go in and you can correct your files. German to French. There's only one switch, and it's from going. The default function of the program is to make a French score, and this is just saying to ignore invisible rest when auto-selecting staves for retention. Now we're back, and French to German. And the German switch is the switch to pull this off, and then there's a dummy switch that's used in conjunction with that. Staves and files, which is a text setting we saw in the control file. You can set it on the command line as well. You can exclude invisible staves when creating a German score. You might have an invisible staff to hold a copyright, or an invisible staff to hold a title. All staves have to be accounted for in the labels control file, so you have to make room for those staves when you consider your master template. Dummy, it's creating a dummy or bar staff for filling out the German score. And that's it for that. And then switches that pertain to both, retain staff P4, and that's if you've already VJ'd a file and you don't want labels to move the P4s of the staves around, because by default it kind of compresses everything down to a nice consecutive flow. And if you've already done your VJ and you just need to update your labels in the margins, well, it would be disastrous to lose your VJs. So retain staff P4 preserves whatever kind of VJ you have. MRI moves rehearsal items to the top staff of the file in the tiled sequence, if there are no, which is a handy thing. And then the set file procedure. Yes, set file itself is explained. SS values for the system separator, the lib path, which it needs to access so it can find the system separator. You see, you can specify anything to be a system separator. You could use a dynamic mark. You could use a note head. The default is P5 equals 77, but you can change that to anything. The lib path statement allows it to find the symbol and to measure it and to figure out what its size is and that kind of thing, so it can tell where the system break is. Because you can have the system separator on the bottom staff of the upper system or on the top staff of the lower system. And it needs to be able to calculate where that system separator is graphically, and it can do so because it looks in the library and it grabs all the information from the drawing itself. And there's another switch for that, and then we're back to this, and then the queue procedure, K. It explains queuing and then how to make queues with the queue switch, the ROC switch, or removal of queues or do not removal of queues. Minimum values for the position of the text for the queue label. Whether or not to retain accents, a stemlet flag for recognizing stemlet notes. There's a certain kind of SHOT apparently wants queues to remain in the key of the source instrument and not to be transposed. And this causes all kinds of problems if you have key signatures that are appropriate for the clef that you're reading, for the instrument that you're reading. It's not just enough to bring the cue untransposed into your part. You need to also take care of pitches that are affected by the key signature you're reading from, and the SHOT switch will take care of that. Switches that have to do with the placement of the cues, the cue text items themselves. More info on that. Ways to override the default pitch values for instruments. So say you have a clarinet part that switches to E flat, from B flat to E flat clarinet midway across the staff, and the label on the margin is for the initial clarinet that's playing the B flat clarinet, and now you have an E flat clarinet playing for the last three measures, and say you want to cue that E flat clarinet part into a different part on the page. Well, if labels are just looking at the staff itself, it's going to see the ID for the B flat clarinet. It's going to think that the notation it's reading is in B flat, and that's not going to work out if you want the key to be transposed. So there are ways that you can tell it, oh, never mind the fact that this is apparently a B flat clarinet, treat it as though it is an E flat clarinet. It requires that kind of transposition, and that way you get the part transposed correctly. You can also have it recognize that it should use the cue label for the E flat clarinet, and this is all done through setting parameters in either the staff that's being read from or being written to, and also in the rests that are specifying the cue. So this explains all of that. And then extraction score procedure, that's L. A P9 list. This writes out a listing of all the P9 values that you'll need for extracting. It explains the copy part, the delete part, and the retain all staves procedures. And then you can limit the area in which the copy part procedure is doing its work. You can, this is explaining exceptional circumstances. Now miscellaneous we've actually already looked at, which is the combine switch, which combines files into a single file, preserving certain things, adding system members. And then version logic is devoted to this pesky topic of which version of a label is to be used given certain conditions. And there are all kinds of interesting conditions that will pop up, and this goes through them and explains how you can go about it through command line switches, parameter overrides, and alt logic, which is what we covered in the demos. But this help screen goes into much more, well, it goes into quite a bit of detail. And it shows the various switches for forcing certain versions to be used over others, by parameter override, and then by the alt logic itself. And this explains the alt logic. And hierarchical version search, like what to do if you're specifying one thing on the command line, but your control file says something else. Which one does labels actually apply? It explains all of that. And that is it. So I hope you've been intrigued, and over and out.